Yeah, so I'll be presenting this vision paper that we published in September, so it's quite new. And yeah, the idea is that it's a starting point for a discussion around where should we go for the next CAP, drawing on the lessons from the past and the most recent reform. So just to say that we had a number of partners involved in this. So yeah, IEEP has a network of think tanks called Think Sustainable Europe, and a number of these partners were involved in developing this work, including Ecologic, but also our members in France, in Spain, and in Denmark, and also Czech Republic as well. So yeah, it's a vision that has actually been co-developed with organizations at the member state level, and we hope that that means that it is grounded also in the realities that member states face, and therefore is something that can actually have appeal in different countries. But we'd be really interested to hear more from you today, because yeah, we had less insights, I think, from Central Eastern Europe, perhaps, as a result of those who were involved. So yeah, we'd be really keen to hear your feedback on our vision now. So just setting the scene, and I think yeah, we've heard about this already this morning. If we just look at the kind of CAP overall and take a step back, we conclude that whilst we've seen some improvements, including in this latest round of reform that's just come into force, that the CAP is still not delivering enough when we think about the scale of the sustainability challenges that we face. And I think that message came out obviously strongly this morning around yeah, that the ambition on the climate front is not enough, both on mitigation and on adaptation, and that these challenges are rather urgent. So some of the reasons that we pulled out that were yeah, kind of shared, I think, by members of the group involved in developing this, was that the dominance of the direct payments is a barrier to significant change in the CAP, because yeah, there's a dependency issue with farmers. There's also yeah, there's path dependency. They seem to be where member states tend to still, I mean, they're still putting the majority of the support into those payments, and whilst they're there, it's quite difficult to make the climate measures attractive in comparison to the direct payments, which are requiring much less from recipients, and perhaps easier to implement also for the authorities. Yeah, there's the insufficient focus on sustainability, which we've covered a lot. We did identify part of that is coming from competing priorities. So the difficulty when you're programming the CAP with these different objectives, that there is 10 objectives, it's very difficult to say exactly, okay, well, how much ambition should there be on environment and climate vis-a-vis economics, and probably difficult for the European Commission to also say to the member states, no, you aren't doing enough on the environmental ones, and you need to do less on the economic ones. So that's an issue, and the general lack of ambition that that has been covered well this morning. So yeah, of course, we do recognise that there has been this improvement in terms of the expansion of more environmental payments and eco schemes in this current period. But again, yeah, these aren't delivering enough. And the context in terms of looking forward the next 10 years and how critical those will be to making quite big changes in the agriculture and the food system. Obviously, more generally, like Anna was saying, it's about tackling consumption as well, and making changes in consumption and production at the same time to complement each other. But looking into the next 10 years, the next CAP will cover 7 years of that. And that next 10 years is going to be critical for action to limit climate change and reverse biodiversity loss, etc. So we actually, and not only is it critical for meeting those end goals, but we also have binding targets coming from the EU, and in some member states also their own national targets in these areas that member states will be expected to meet. So these include the Climate 2040 targets, which are not yet set, but these will be coming soon, and member states will have to reach them, obviously, or make a big contribution to reaching them in the next CAP period. Then there's also the LULUCF targets for 2030. Again, this will cover the current CAP and also the beginning of the next CAP implementation. And then there's also other things like the nature restoration law, which has some provisions for agriculture, and then there's a number of other legislations that are still being agreed. So we don't know exactly what will come out of them, but still to say, I think even on the climate front, we expect that there will have to be a lot more action from the agriculture sector, and the Commission is saying that will need to be the case. There's other external drivers for change as well in the next period, and this is where we also see some big potential drivers of shifts in CAP, the political kind of debate and the conditions around the CAP. So the big one, I think probably heard about it already, is the EU enlargement. That if we get member states like Ukraine and huge agricultural producers joining the EU, or even the prospect of them joining in the 2030s, then this will mean that the CAP and the system of direct payments, which we've said are problematic for a number of reasons, will just not be as attractive or be viable, because member states would have to pay or spend a lot of the CAP budget would end up going to the new member states. And generational renewal is also one, and I think this was mentioned already today as well, is that we still have this situation where there's an aging farming workforce, and so there will be a lot of, obviously, well, hopefully younger farmers coming into the sector, and they will have a different perspective from the older generation, who obviously it's harder for them to change. So there's opportunities there as well for trying to seize the kind of the opportunities created by a new generation of thinking. And I've already covered, I think, that why it's crucial in the next kind of 10 years, in the period to the mid-2030s. Okay, so what have we said in our vision? Well, first we took a step back and we tried to say, well, if you were funding we assume that a transition is needed in agriculture and land management in Europe, and if you were to dedicate, the ideal, I guess, funding system based on what the real needs are that we see today, what would you prioritize putting money into? And we came up with these 4 funding priorities. The first one is transition aid, and this would be transition that is geared towards sustainable and resilient farming and land management practices and business models. So it would be supporting farmers who are farming in an unsustainable way to shift the practices to become sustainable, and we'd have to obviously define that, whether it's regenerative agriculture. For some it might be precision farming or organic farming, agroecology. So in some cases, shifting the business model, but staying within farming, but supporting. We think that there's a lot more need for supporting that phase of transition, because that's quite a risky period for farmers, where their yields might go down, the profit might go down. In the case of, say, regenerative agriculture, we see that actually over time, then things stabilize and they can get actually similar yields to before, but there will be a period, where they're experimenting, trialing, and they need some financial support to buffer that. In some cases also it will be about a just transition, so support to diversify part or all of the business out of farming. So this might be in areas where local pollution issues mean that you have to reduce the number of livestock farms, for example. Also another one is obviously farming on peatlands in certain areas. So we think that that's really important, hasn't been talked about so much before when we talk about reforming the CAP. There's been more of a focus on what we identify as the second priority, not second in terms of importance, but just number 2, which is these payments for public goods and environmental services. And there's a strong literature and history of saying that public money should be for public goods, paying for things that farmers don't get market revenue from. So for providing biodiversity, habitat on their farm, or carbon sequestration. So we think that there's still very much valid that we should pay for that, and that would become in the long run the basis of funding from the EU and what is now the funds that were within the CAP, so that this would be the ongoing basis for still delivering a large amount of public support to probably what would be majority farmers, but doing it for obviously contributing towards EU environmental goals. The third category is advice and training and engagement. And this is, something that is well recognized, I think, in a lot of literature, that implementing these changes can be difficult for farmers. Often they lack proper advice, and that also the uptake of more complex, often more effective schemes is much more successful when there's really good advice that accompanies it. And I think another thing that we'll probably want to see more in this transition, and we'll need to see, will be also like peer-to-peer learning between farms and all kinds of things. So we put that as a separate category because we thought that the priority that's currently given to this is so small compared to what it needs to be, that it really deserves its own category, and it would support both the transition aid and the ongoing payments for environmental services. And finally, research and innovation. And this is because we don't necessarily know all, we know some of the solutions, but we'll have to keep improving knowledge around practices, and keep researching obviously innovative ways of doing things that can contribute towards sustainability. So we don't necessarily know all the solutions that we'll need yet. So we should put funding into that, and that will obviously be research and innovation that will be supporting things like diversification for farmers, or the transition to more resilient models. So what we also did in our vision, beyond identifying these priorities, was saying, well, actually, how could this look a bit more concretely in terms of thinking about the EU budget after 2027 and what we do with the CAP? So this is intended as a basis for having a discussion, really. What we want to launch is a probably more fundamental discussion, I think, around the CAP as it currently is, and given the level of the challenges, what could actually work better. And obviously one option is to stick with the current CAP and improve it, but we've really questioned, I think, in our paper, can that really achieve what is needed in terms of ambition, given that we've already had a number of reforms aiming at becoming more green, and we keep seeing just incremental changes. Can we really expect a change on the scale that is required to tune the CAP to the funding priorities that we've identified? So what we've said that we would like to look much more into, and we think could be an alternative model to explore, is creating a new European Sustainable Land Management and Transition Fund in the next EU budget. So this would really be focused on those priorities that I mentioned. It would be, only focused on sustainability priorities, and delivering the transition aid and public goods payments. It would be, we would say that it would have to support viable farm operations with realistic payment levels, and that we could imagine a 7-year transition within which direct payments would be phased out, and that would basically over time the money would be transferred into this new fund, and that would mean that we would shift long term from a model of direct payments as the main form of support to a model of public goods payments as a main form of support for also budgets beyond 2035 or 2034. The final thing is also that we've done a little bit of estimation, well, actually, how much do you need for this transition, and what money would we be able to mobilize from what we could take from the current CAP to fund this new fund. And especially at the beginning, if we're phasing out direct payments, then there's not so much available at the beginning. You know, we take the eco scheme budget, the agri-environmental scheme budget, and some of the investment support, etc. But that's going to be much less. And actually, at the beginning, you need the most. So what we also thought was that this fund could be like in other funds for the EU. It would have to have provisions within it that you could actually mobilize private finance arrangements. And there's also a question around whether will there be future, in revenue streams as well coming from an agricultural emissions trading system, as Julia was talking about. So all of these different sources of funding we need to be thinking about to top up the fund. I'm nearly there, but Anna, I probably will then take your offer of going to 20 minutes. So this is just a diagram of how this would look. We've just got the, just show that we've got the current cap here, but what we're proposing would happen after 2027 would be that you would, basically you've got the cap pillar 1 fund here. A portion of that would be going towards this new sustainable land management and transition fund, along with a portion of pillar 2 payments. But we also think that there is still a role for a smaller version of the CAP and rural development policy, and that this would be dealing with objectives that are not primarily environmental. So there might be areas in Europe where we would still justify some form of income support or anti-poverty measures in rural areas. I think that's probably especially relevant in Eastern Europe. And so, we would still have a kind of, this doesn't completely abolish the cap, we would still have the cap, but just a smaller fund dedicated to it. And that would continue to be run as now by agricultural authorities, but that we would propose that the new fund would be managed by environment and climate authorities who have the direct also link and responsibility for implementing these climate and other environmental targets that, like I said, have been set for the mid-2030s to 2040 as well. Okay, that's it. I would just say that the next steps, we want to gather feedback on this vision. It's not it's just a starting point, like we said. So it's something to debate and refine. We also want to do some follow-up analysis in the coming years, so looking at how the vision might impact on the EU budget distribution and on farms, trying to come up with some better ideas around what transition looks like and the costs involved for farmers, and what sources there might be of funding outside of the CAP and the EU budget. And then also looking at how do we create a coherent climate and agricultural policy mix that will spur action at a sufficient level of ambition in the next decade and obviously beyond, because this transition isn't necessarily going to be finished, I think, by the end of the next CAP. Thank you.